Is it on though?
Yeah, I'm gonna try.
Okay.
Stay on.
How are you? Good. Okay, so with all of the talk about the nominees to the Supreme Court, so one of the most spoken about issues is it going fully conservative? Will they overturn Roe v. Wade? Okay, so with all that talk, I thought it was a good idea to investigate a little bit the Jewish approach to the issue. So the background, what was Jane Roe's real name? She's married to John Doe. You didn't realize that, right? Right. So actually, in June 1969, 21-year-old Norma McCurvey discovered she was pregnant with her third child. She returned to Dallas, Texas. The law in Texas then was that in order to have an abortion, they would allow it in cases of rape or incest, or for the purpose of saving the life of the mother. Those were the only conditions in 1969 when in the state of Texas abortion was legal. She first tried to claim rape, but being that there was no police document report that showed that there was a rape, so then she rescinded that, and in the end, her child was born before the case was decided, and the child was put up for adoption. In 1970, a suit was filed in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas on behalf of McCorvey, alias Jane Roe. The defendant in the case was, take a wild guess, what his last name might have been? Wade, correct. He was the DA, Henry Wade, representing the state of Texas. In June 1970, a 3-judge panel unanimously declared that Texas law was unconstitutional. On appeal to Supreme Court, it issued its decision January 1973, 72 majority in favor of Roe. Okay, and therefore, Justice Blackmun's majority opinion rejected a fetal right to life argument. And we'll soon see both in the Gemara, in the Talmud, amongst the earlier commentators, this whole idea is revolving around how do we view this fetus? What is the status of this fetus? So the court they recognized the right to an abortion as a fundamental right including the guarantee of personal privacy. This is a person's own decision. Okay? Now, the court wanted to protect both the mother's health and the potentiality of human life. So the original decision divided things basically into 3 trimesters. The first trimester, it was then believed that the procedure was safer than childbirth, and therefore was completely up to the discretion of the woman and her physician. From the end of the first trimester until fetal viability, and that's going to remain, that once there is fetal viability, its ability to survive outside of the womb, so then already in most states, there are different points of what they consider to be fetal viability. But I would say usually in the early 20 weeks, that is when most states consider there to be fetal viability, and at that point, they have to protect the potentiality of human life. They have to protect the child, right? And therefore, it is not allowed. And from the end of the first trimester until that fetal viability, then it's the health of the mother that is most compelling. In 1992, that was further allowances were made that a woman had a right to choose abortion any point before viability, and the state could not withhold that. So that settled it, right? At that point, there was a wonderful consensus. The Supreme Court decided it, and there was no debate further, right? Not exactly.
Judaism looks at it as a viable fetus. It's when he graduates from medical school.
Maybe. Maybe. Or when they start to pay back the loans. Yes. Okay. So in the world today, we have the pro-choice people. And they say that this is a woman's right, and the government, religious authority, right, has no authority there. And, any claim for the embryo or the fetus is pushed aside by the right, the choice of the woman. Those who identify themselves as pro-life, they say human life begins at fertilization. That's when human life begins. And therefore abortion, they say, is the immoral killing of a human being. It inflicts suffering on the unborn child, and it's unfair to allow abortion when couples who cannot biologically conceive are waiting to adopt. So those are the two extremes, the two camps that we have. Right? It's interesting that this Norma McCorvey, originally, she was working in abortion clinics and women's marches, and she was full into that. In 1995, she struck up a correspondence with the head of an anti-abortion clinic that had moved next door to the abortion clinic where she worked. And she ended up becoming, just an interesting tidbit of history, an anti-abortion activist, and dedicated her life to reversing Roe v. Wade. But she has since passed on. So she has given up that battle at this point. But in a way, you see just how conflicted this whole topic is. That the Roe of Roe v. Wade ended up working to reverse Roe v. Wade. Okay, as can well be assumed, the traditional Jewish view does not fit conveniently into any of the major camps over here. Okay? We would not want a ban on abortion, because we'll see there are times when we say that it is justified and that halachically it would be condoned. So we don't want the government telling us absolutely not. At the same time, I think many people are understandably somewhat pained by the cavalier attitude that if you get pregnant, we'll just abort the child, and there is potential life there that is being snuffed out. In the religious world, I would say, when such things happen and a girl gets pregnant, so then I know of a number of cases where the girl goes off for some schooling elsewhere to not make a big deal. Not everyone needs to know what's going on. The baby is born and then given up for adoption to a family who want to raise a child and didn't merit the incredible blessing of having their own children. So we certainly, when I say we, I think most Torah world Jewry certainly does not want the courts to decide when we can or can't, but at the same time is somewhat pained by the flippant view of human life, of potential human life. Okay, so let's start to analyze. We'll see some very interesting sources, and then we'll have some actual cases that came up, and hear the wide view of opinions and approaches. Right? So first of all, we need to analyze how do we view fetal life and the ending, the termination of that life. We'll have to look at how significant is the life expectancy of the child, or the quality of life. If this child we see is going to be born with physical handicaps, with emotional, mental handicaps, so how do we view such a life? And will that play a role? How about the psychological impact on the mother, on the family? How does emotional health play? And lastly, there's a burden. There's a burden, right? It's going to cramp my style. This is not the lifestyle. This child with special needs is going to drastically change my life. From the moment the child is born until my last breath on this earth, my life will be drastically changed. Is that a factor? If the couple say, we don't want to deal with that. So we can either view fetal life as equal to an adult human, or as just a clump, a conglomerate of dividing cells, or somewhere in the middle. Right? That's the range. It can be viewed as a part of the mother, or an alien entity that is within her. If it's just a part of the mother, so there's no law against self-mutilation. A person decides they want to harm a part of their body. That's not something that we would encourage, but sometimes medically, emotionally, right? So these are all different factors. Now, we mentioned life expectancy, right? And then also quality of life. Yes?
Actually, the self-mutilation, like that we can't get tattoos, and aren't we supposed to respect the body?
We are. So we're not, if we're viewing it as a part of the body, we're not talking about wanton self-mutilation. There's a reason here. Right? If there's a diseased part of the body,
okay,
so we would cut it out.
right.
Right? So, right? We're not talking about wanton, reckless self-mutilation, but it's a whole different view. If this is just a part of the mother, a part of her body, then we're not going to be making an issue over what she might decide to do for her own health, be it physical or emotional. Okay. Now, common cases where this comes up, and again we'll see a broad range of views. Down syndrome. On average, they live into the 5th decade of life. Exhibit marginal mental diminished abilities. They have a higher rate of congenital abnormalities, greater risks for different things, but they possess near normal health status on a daily basis. And they live a good life. There are many families who feel very enriched by the Down syndrome child member of their family. And also, whenever we're discussing quality of life, we are imposing our view of quality of life. You know, a child that's born blind. So we who are gifted with sight say, oh, what type of life is that? But for that child, that's what life is. Right? You know, it's almost like a super being that's that's in some UFO looking down and saying, "Oh, what type of quality of life do those humans have?" Right? They can't fly. They can't do whatever things that these imagined people might. Right? So what kind of, right? But that's from their perspective. From our perspective, right? I could book a flight, but I don't plan to flap and get anywhere, and I don't view that as a diminishing of my quality of life. That's just the reality. And the way a child is born, if they are born with different diminished abilities, so we might view that as a diminished quality of life, but for them, that is simply life. And to take that away, CF, cystic fibrosis, right, ranges from mild to life-threatening. They often have difficult lives with myriad medications, hospitalizations, surgeries, and sometimes transplantation. Tay-Sachs used to be a major issue for the Jewish Ashkenazic community, thanks in a good part to an organization called Dor Yesharim, which means straight generations. So before, certainly in the religious community, this is before a couple gets serious in their relationship, they'll go and get tested by Dor Yesharim. And they'll give their numbers in, and they will not be told, you are a carrier, you are that, but they'll be told, good idea, or not such a good idea. And that has helped to greatly diminish the disease of Tay-Sachs, right? That is fatal in early childhood, right? With vision loss, hearing loss, paralysis, and usually death at around the age of 5. And these are all things that we can find out prior to the child being born, right? Well, early in the pregnancy, we can find out where we are with these things. Anencephaly is a failure of the brain and skull to completely form during fetal development. If the fetus survives pregnancy, it will live for a few hours to a few days. And this is often diagnosed prenatally by an ultrasound, that they're able to discern this. So let's look at what the Torah says about this. Let's look at what the early commentators, known as the Rishonim, say about it. Let's look at what the present day halachic deciders, how they view this. And then we'll go through some different cases. Now, there's going to be different views, and we'll see the sources themselves can be interpreted in different ways. The Torah tells us in Bereshit, Shofech dam ha'adam ba'adam damo yishafech. One who spills the blood of a man, ba'adam, by a man, his blood shall be spilled. A person spills another person's blood, they're liable for capital punishment. Fair enough. But Rabbi Yisroel says, interesting, Shofech dam ha'adam, you spill the blood of a person, ba'adam. What does ba'adam actually mean? In a person. How do you spill the blood of a person in a person? Who's a person in a person whose blood you're spilling? He says, Havi Omer Ze'ubar. Oh, he says that's referring to an embryo, a fetus. That's spilling the blood of a person in a person. The person in a person, were I female? The person in a person, right? And spilling that blood, he says that that's tantamount to murder. Wow. So that source. Now, this is one of the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach. One of the 7 Noahide mitzvot. Okay? Normally, whatever is prohibited for a non-Jew is included in the prohibitions for Jews. Okay? Now, there are those, though, that say, this is the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael. This is one opinion, Rabbi Yishmael's opinion, but it's not necessarily the consensus opinion. But according to the wording of that pasuk, abortion is tantamount to murder. On the other hand, right, there's always on the other hand. The Torah in Shemot tells us, V'chi yinatzu anashim. Two men are fighting. And in the process of their fight, v'yinakvu isha hara, v'yitzu yiladeha. They end up hitting a pregnant woman and causing her to miscarry. Anosh ye'anesh. Right? He will be punished, and it is a monetary punishment. Now, if a person murders and causes monetary damage at the same time, right? Classic, you take a knife and he sticks into someone's heart. Well, he tore his nice shirt, right? That's at least $12, right? Right? And the undershirt, right? Right? And the tzitzit, let's not forget the tzitzit, right? And so there's a death penalty for murder, and there's also a bit of a bill for the clothing. So we say kamle b'rabimine is a halachic concept. That for that one act, you only get the stricter of the punishments. So there's no monetary payment that needs to be made because you're getting a death penalty. Over here, what's happening?
Just
monetary.
Only monetary payment,
So that must
which
be-
seems to indicate that this is a monetary violation. I've caused harm to the person of that woman. So now we know there are laws of damages. If you harm someone, then there's monetary compensation that needs to be made. So this seems to be viewed, according to this, as harm done to the woman. And therefore, there needs to be monetary compensation, which seems that we don't view this abortion as murder, but it has caused harm. That's what we find in the Torah. Let's go now to the Torah Sheba'al Peh. What is the Torah Sheba'al Peh? The oral law, that which was transmitted to Moshe orally on Mount Sinai, passed down through the generations, incorporated by Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi as the Mishnah, and the Gemara is the debates in understanding that Mishnah. Right? So the oral Torah, in a broad sense, is when God said to Moshe, and listen, there's going to be a verse, there should be an oat, a sign on the hand, and totafot on the eyes. So Moshe said, what's the oat? What's the totafot? And God explained what it is. And that was passed down orally, and then ended up in our Mishnah and our Gemara. See, over at the Gemara Menachos, you see exactly how the hands fill-in are done, how the heads fill-in are done, etc., etc. So the Mishnah Olot says as follows. Ha'isha shehi mikasher leleid. A woman who is having difficulty giving birth. She's in labor, and her life is in danger from this labor. Mechatchin et havlad me'eha. We can literally dismember this embryo that's inside of her to get the embryo out, which is putting the mother into this life-threatening state, to save the life. Shechayeha kodmin lechayav. Her life takes precedence over the life of the embryo. Yatsa rosho. Once the head has emerged, the child is already born to a certain degree, in the process of being born. Ein nogenbo. Now we can't. She'ein dochen nefesh mipnei nefesh. We don't take away one life to save another life. Right? We can't take away one life to save another life. That comes up if we'll have a discussion on on organ donation, right? So if one is of the halachic opinion that brain death is not halachic death, so hospitals, the heart might be beating, but if they've declared a person brain dead, so they say that person is dead, they will remove that beating heart and send it to another patient. So according to those who say halachic death is not brain death, and if the heart is beating, the person is not dead, then we can't do that. That's murder. You can't kill this person in order to save another person. Ein dochin nefesh mini nefesh. The head is emerged. At that point, you can't do anything to that child to save the life of the mother. So we see clearly the mother's life takes precedence over that of the fetus. Perhaps the mother's life is actual life and the fetus is only potential life. Now what's interesting also is that we said her life comes before his life. But once he's born, it's not chai, it's not life, it's a nefesh. It's a soul and a soul. So are there differences in the nuanced wording over here? Now the Gemara asks, V'amai, rodef hu? There's a halachic concept of a rodef. A rodef is one person is pursuing another person, trying to kill that person. What are you supposed to do? Kill the rodef. Not only the person who's being pursued is allowed to save his own life with the life of his pursuant, but anyone is allowed and should save the life of the nirdaf with the life of the rodef. So the Gemara says, well, perhaps this child should have the status of a rodef. This child is killing the mother. The mother is dying as a result of this child. And the Gemara says, Shani Hatam is different over there. The Mishamaya Karadfila. It's not this embryo, it's not this infant that is chasing, that's the rodef. From the heavens, for whatever reason, she's being subjected to this treacherous situation, but either we don't view the child as a rodef, right, because it certainly has no intent to cause any harm, or perhaps, right, this is different, this is happening min hashamayim. The Gemara of the Mishnah in Nida says, Tino ben yom echad hahargo chayav. A 1-day-old baby, one who kills that child is liable. What does that seem to imply?
Death penalty.
Until one day.
Until one day, less than a day, abortion inside, one is not liable for that. Or maybe there's no death penalty, but perhaps it still is murder. There are always so many different ways to interpret and to understand it. Lastly, the last source from the Talmud is in Yevamot. There we say that for the first 40 days, it's considered Maya Ba'alma. The child that's forming is considered just Mayim. Just what? Water. Now it's interesting that I think we say that 40 days is about when there's the fetal heartbeat. Is that correct, doctor?
Yeah,
Thereabouts. Yeah.
6 weeks.
Yeah. Now, if that's the case, then maybe the first 40 days is not considered anything. And there are other laws of this 40-day period, right? We were discussing before in our other class, right? Firstborn child, right? So if a woman miscarries before 40 days, then the child that follows is still considered to be the Bechor, the firstborn child. So maybe before 40 days, we have these allowances. Okay. Let's go now. So that's the Gemara. Let's go see. Now, the way that halacha evolves is we have the Talmud. We have the Torah. We have the Talmud. And then we have those earlier commentators known as the Rishonim who comment on the Talmud and they extract laws from the Talmud. Right? Rambam, Ramban, Tosfot, Rambam, Maimonides, right? They extract, Rabbeinu Asher, they extract the laws. So let's see what some of the Rishonim, how they view this, how they understand it. And then we have our present day poskim, halachic deciders, who take all of that knowledge and apply it to the questions that come up today that were unimagined back in the time of the Talmud or in the time of the Rishonim. So let's start with some of the Rishonim. Tosfot asks, remember we started, the first source was Shofech Dam Adam Ba'adam, a person in a person. So how, he says that we have a rule, whatever is prohibited to the Noahides is also prohibited to us. So how could that apply to a Gentile and not to a Jew? And they say that no, both Jews and Gentiles would be prohibited from abortion. The difference might be in the punishment that one gets for that. But according to that Tosfot, though he implies something else elsewhere, Tosfot was not one person. Rashi was one person, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki. Tosafot means additions, and there were a number of different Baalei Tosafot, and different sages in that period of time in Spain, mostly in Spain, and France, who added their comments. So there he says that it is a Torah prohibition to do an abortion. Okay? A Torah prohibition. Right? Torah murder, we'll have to see. The Maharit has a different opinion. He says, as we saw in the case of the pregnant woman who lost her baby, he says that it's an act, an abortion would be the act of inflicting a wound onto another person. It's not under the laws of murder. It's wounding another person. Biblically prohibited to wound a person, but not murder. Now, a doctor is cutting people open, right? But that's not considered wounding when it's for the health of that person. So according to the Maharit, now there's a lot of leeway when it comes to abortion. According to the Tosafot, if it's considered murder, then there's very, very little leeway. What would the cases be allowed? If it's considered murder, when would it be allowed?
If you could prove that this fetus was being a rodef.
Okay, to save the life of the mother. When else might it be allowed? In the case of, let's say, anencephaly, in the case where the child is not considered viable for life, right? It's not, the way this child is developing, it is not compatible with life. It will not be able to live. Maybe a few minutes, maybe a few hours, but a human being cannot survive with that medical state. So then it would not be considered alive for it to be considered murder.
Well, wouldn't you wait a certain amount to see if a natural miscarriage happened in the case?
So the question then would be, must we put the mother through the continued agony of carrying a baby that she'll probably miscarry or might go through birth and have the baby die within minutes or hours? right? So is there anything gained by putting the mother through that physical and emotional ordeal? Okay. There is the Chavat Yair, who says that the issue is hashchatat zera, which is destruction of seed, right? Which prohibits any ejaculation outside the context of proper marital relations. So therefore, since the embryo develops from that sperm, so therefore he says destroying the embryo is like destroying the seed. Okay? So this is another biblical issue, but not an offshoot of homicide. Okay. If we're viewing it as an act of murder, like that first source that we saw, the first Tosafot, so then, right, the same way that we don't believe in euthanasia, there's a person who has limited abilities, physical, mental, we're not going to take away that person's life, so too we can't take away that person's life. We can't perform an abortion, right? As I mentioned before, there are certain cases where even then, again, if it's endangering the life of the mother, or if it's incompatible with life, that I can't murder something that's not viably alive. According to the Maharit, right, where the issue is chavala, is wounding, that means that this is a part of the mother, has no inherent, independent claim to life, but you can inflict damage to your own body. Well, if it's your life or damage to your body, then obviously, clearly, it'll be damage to the body. Wounding is permitted in medical need, right? And we could argue that to destroy a diseased part of the body that's going to produce agony and pain does not constitute Kabbalah, destruction. Okay. Now, there's another approach that says that there is no Torah issue when it comes to an abortion. It's rabbinically, it's midrabanan, it's a rabbinic prohibition. Right? So either the baby, the fetus is viewed as non-human, right? Or this non-properly living entity within the mother. Now, if that's the case, then there is tremendous room for leniency. We say, b'makom tsar lo gozer rabbanan. The rabbis don't institute their decrees when there's pain, when there's anguish for someone. Or b'makom sakana lo gozer rabbanan. There are many times that we say, oh, in such a case, the rabbinic decree does not apply. So if we're following that approach, then that opens up the door very, very widely for abortions in different situations. Let's go through some of the contemporary poskim, halachic deciders. Rav Moshe Feinstein, he views it, Rav Moshe Feinstein lived until the 1990s, he was one of the probably the preeminent halachic decider of late 20th century Torah Jews. He viewed it as ritzicha. He viewed it as murder. And therefore, he was very, very strict when it came to that. The Achiezer of Chaim Ozer, he said, when is the fetus a rodef? That's when labor has begun. It's already detached or detaching itself from the womb, then it's become its own entity. But before that, it is a limb of the mother. And of course, we always sacrifice a limb to save the entire being. So he would seem to view it not as murder, but as wounding. Rav Avadi Yosef, who was one of the most foremost Sephardic poskim, He says abortion is biblically prohibited, but if it's pharmacologically induced, it's not done, but it's done through medication that the body then aborts the child, and within the first 3 months, that's only rabbinic, he says. In which case then, there is, again, their leeway. The Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, is one of the most lenient approaches when it comes to abortions. He says, as we've seen, there are legitimate positions all across the spectrum. Those who say that it's murder, and those who see hardly a prohibition at all. See, he says, due to the severe emotional pain and suffering of raising a child with a critical disease, one may follow the lenient opinion and opt for an abortion. That's what he was talking about in the case of Tay-Sachs. In the case of Downs, so there he said, in some families, having a child with Down syndrome could create emotional instability that could threaten the family, could threaten the marital relationship. Certainly the frequency of divorce when there are such challenging situations with special children, the frequency of divorce is much higher than the general average frequency. See, he would allow it with a case-by-case evaluation. See, he would even allow at times in a case of Down syndrome. Rav Yaakov Endem, he said that when the child is a mamzer mean born from an either extramarital relationship, extramarital meaning the woman was married and became pregnant from another man. Extramarital is not married. Extramarital, this mamzer means though a married woman had relations with another man who fathered this child, or who impregnated her, I should say, right? Or an illicit relationship, those relationships, brother, sister, etc., that are prohibited, that produces a mamzer. And he said that in such a case, to save the mother from that terrible situation, so then Rabbi Yaakov Endem allowed abortion. Rav Shlomo Goren, who was the first chief rabbi of the modern state of Israel, so he, like Rav Moshe, had said that one should not go for this amniocentesis. Is anybody?
Amniocentesis.
Thank you. That, right? Because there's nothing you can do anyhow, so why should you do that? Right? And hashkafically it goes deeper than that. Right? We say that once something is known, then for it to change takes an overt miracle. But if it's not known, then we never know what can be. So, but he says that in a case where they did, and a diagnosis of Down, right, could really affect the mother's, the family's health. So he said then, every case must be examined by a geneticist, a mental health professional, and a competent halachic authority who can integrate all of that and come to a decision. Okay. So when it's dangerous to the mother, then across the board, life-threatening to the mother, across the board, even Rav Moshe, right? Even those who say that it's murder will say yes. But the Mishnah said clearly to save the life of the mother, then an abortion is obligatory to save the life of the mother. However, the Chazon Ish had said you have to be very careful because in his experience, doctors tend to be rather carefree in proclaiming a situation as being possibly dangerous to the mother when in truth it really is not dangerous to the mother. So you really have to ascertain. But if that's the case, then across the board, everyone would agree that that is not just allowed, but even, I would say, mandated. Let's say severe suffering, but not danger. What would you say, my
You
friends?
mean like a long painful labor?
No, labor is called labor for a reason. No, we're talking about severe suffering.
I'm not clear.
Emotional suffering. Raising a
Not
kid
just-
is difficult. Like a Jewish kid.
He thought to cure the mother's illness. In order to cure an illness, so the mother has an illness, and aborting this will allow us to cure the mother's illness. When she's pregnant, we can't give her what she needs for this illness, but it's not life-threatening. So there, what would we say?
Probably.
Yes.
Well, according to who? Right? According to Rav Moshe? No. Right? According to the Ma'arit and others, and it's Tzitz Eliezer, right? So then, if there's emotional problems of raising, if he allows emotional problems of raising this Tay-Sachs child and then burying this Tay-Sachs child, right? So then when it's for her own